Good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to call the meeting of the study committee to look at the impact of disabilities on folks with disabilities. And this will be recorded. I see that all of the seats behind the camera are empty. I guess you all saw yourself from the previous meetings. Okay, so we're let's just get started. My name is Kathy Staub. I represent Hillsborough District 25 in Ward 5 in Manchester.
And Jessica LaMontagne from Stratford 17 in Dover.
Can we under here? Okay, we're going to we're going to move approval of the minutes to the end of the meeting. So we're going to go right ahead with the presentations from the stakeholders. So I would like to call Charles Saya with the Stable New Hampshire program to come forward. You can all come up here if you want. Thank you for coming.
Oh, thank you for having us. Okay, there we go. Thank you for having us, Representative.
Good afternoon. For the record, State Treasurer Monica Mazzapelli.
And Chuck Saya, last name spelling is S like Sam, AIA, Executive Director, Governance Commission on Disability. And Chair Staub, once again, thank you for the opportunity to present on New Hampshire's and to give you a very high-level review of New Hampshire's Able Savings Program, known as the NH Able Plan. Seated, as Monica had stated, the State Treasurer and myself, the Executive Director of the Governance Commission on Disability, what is known as the co-administrators of the Able Savings Program in New Hampshire. So what I'll do, subject to your approval, Representative Monica and I will present together. And again, at a very high level, because I know you have an interim report that's due, and we wanted to ensure that we gave you as much information as we could today. And obviously, we're more than happy to answer questions and in the upcoming year to either come back or address any questions that you may have. So just to give you an overview, when we look at the Able Savings Program, in our world, we look at this as truly a game changer, because with Able Savings accounts, individuals with disabilities are able to save money without jeopardizing needs-based benefits. And typically those needs-based benefits are SSI, which is known as Supplemental Security Income, as well as Medicaid. And coupled with that is that the monies in the account can now be used on what are referred to as qualified disability expenses. I wasn't able to attend last week's hearing in person, but I did listen to a rebroadcast on YouTube. And what you had heard, part of the tenor of the discussion from consumers, individuals, and families of individuals with disabilities is that there's that threshold. Essentially, for years, individuals with disabilities and their family members understood that an individual with a disability could only have so much in assets, and that was typically about $2,000. If they exceeded the $2,000, then that would jeopardize those benefits that we just spoke about, the Medicaid and the SSI. So what occurred in 2014, federal legislation passed, which was known as the Stephen Beck Jr. Achieving a Better Life Experience Act, the ABLE Act, which essentially, it became federal law that now individuals with disabilities could now open up these accounts, and the states would then follow with their own enabling legislation to allow for those accounts. In 2016, New Hampshire had its own legislation, which is now codified in RSA 195K. And basically, this authorized qualified able savings accounts in New Hampshire. New Hampshire launched its program in 2017. And at that time, and it's understandable because this program was around for a good many of years, at the time, New Hampshire's program was known as STABLE, STABLE, Stable NH. And that was in effect from 2017 up until last year, just about this time. When the contract came up for renewal, State Treasurer and myself, as authorized by statute, looked at the program and said, are there other options that may benefit New Hampshire? So at that point last year, we continued with obviously our Able Savings Program, and now in New Hampshire, it's known as the NH Able Plan. And we did put brochures, what we refer to as slimline brochures, inside your folder. So that'll go over exactly what the account is about. So again, from an administrative standpoint, New Hampshire is now part of the National Able Alliance, which is a consortium of 19 states. And myself and Monica will be the first ones to admit we meet very regularly with our sister states at the national level as it deals with the operation of ABLE accounts. In New Hampshire, there are currently 1,184 account holders in the state of New Hampshire, and that includes both the former stable as well as the NH ABLE plan. New Hampshire has roughly, 11.5 million in assets under advisement. Nationally, just to give you a snapshot, there's 162,969 accounts nationally with about 1.74 billion in assets. So again, we're looking at in New Hampshire 1184 accounts per the Institute on Disability, their most recent compendium on disability statistics. Our population in New Hampshire is about 1.3 million, and there are 182,000 individuals in New Hampshire per the IOD, the Institute on Disability, that do report self-disclosing that they have a disability. So that gives you that gives you an overview of administratively how it works, and from a very high level again. When we're looking at the New Hampshire ABLE plan, we've always said from day one when we launched in New Hampshire, it truly is a game changer for individuals with disabilities and their families. That threshold, the spend down, that need to ensure that you no longer have that $2,000, that's gone, that's been eradicated with the institution of the ABLE Savings Program across the country. From the Governor's Commission on Disability, we look at the Americans with Disabilities Act as this monumental piece of federal legislation, civil rights. But when we consider other statutes, ABLE's right up there because it did. It really transformed the landscape so that now individuals can save without jeopardizing benefits. And in conjunction with that, and I put it in the handout, when an individual is looking at SSI determination or Medicaid determination, I think it was back in 2019, HUD essentially came out with I don't want to say a report, but essentially an edict that even housing benefits, Section 8, there are a slew of other federal housing benefits that if an individual has in New Hampshire an NH ABLE plan account, again, that won't go into determination for those Section 8 vouchers and that other public housing benefits. So you have SSI, you have Medicaid, and for the purpose of this forum to now think that housing also, for purposes of the public housing benefits, the monies and the contributions and the interest, and I think the state treasurer would agree with that, everything in the ABLE account does not get counted for those federal housing benefits. And they're listed, inside our handout, we did put together references that we can actually send to you by email so that you can hyperlink right over to them. It may be helpful for your report, so we're more than happy to do that.
That'd be great.
Again, at a very high level, in order to have an account, the individual, to be eligible, the onset of the disability must be by age 26. Then there are other criteria, and really the criteria that is most often talked about, the individual has to be eligible to receive supplemental security income or SSDI, Social Security Disability Insurance. So those are typically the determining factors. So the individual opens the account, a loved one can open the account. There's a hierarchy of individuals that can open the account. If the individual doesn't have legal capacity to open the account, parents, guardians can step in. If an individual owns the account in his or her own name, they can assign power of attorney so that someone can assist them in managing. So again, when we look at it from the disability community, we're really expanding freedom. We're ensuring that individuals can live independently. I look at this sort of as a toolbox now, as with the intent that you have to look at the housing crisis, which we know is a situation that has to get addressed. But now to add this to the resources, where it all flushes out, we don't know. But again, to have ABLE at least as something that individuals with disabilities and their families are aware of. So once the money is in the account, then an individual with a disability can save $18,000 per calendar year in contributions, which is huge. And in conjunction with that, if they're working, they can add roughly about another $14,000 to the account. And again, this is, for determining SSI and Medicaid, these are safeguarded. We're not hiding assets here. That's not what we're doing, but we're actually putting the money where it can be. We won't get into it today. You've heard of special needs trusts, wonderful vehicles. Many individuals with disabilities don't have a special needs trust, but ABLE accounts are not, we don't encourage it that they go to override a special need trust, but actually they work in conjunction with them, because the money's in a special need trust and hypothetically speaking, may actually fund the ABLE account. And once the money is in the account, the individual with a disability can spend the money on qualified disability expenses, what we refer to as a QDE. And typically a QDE, a disability expense, is related to the disability, and it looks to enhance quality of your life. It is an incredible list of items that are under QDEs, and it has a very broad application. Personal support services, food, technology, education. There is just a host. And again, for this committee, housing. So housing expenses, be it a mortgage, be it a rent, be it whatever the utility bills, whatever the individual is paying for housing, if they have an ABLE account, they can then pay those expenses. There's also investment options, which I will turn over to the state treasurer to discuss. Because again, I should have said also, and this is really within the wheelhouse of our state treasurer, ABLE savings plans were fashioned against college savings plans. So college savings have been around for years. Advocates, as the story was told to me, going back to 2014 and before, essentially went to the feds and say, well, if we can do this for other children and we can save for college, why can't we do the similar for individuals with disabilities? So with that, Monica will go over the investments.
Thanks, Chuck. And so I would just to highlight a few things. So I agree with Chuck. An ABLE account is a very powerful account for individuals with disabilities. It just provides the opportunity to save funds, and the earnings grow tax-free if they're used for qualified disability expenses, including housing, which is what is being studied here as part of this committee. So it is an incredible account, as Chuck mentioned, is a game changer. So individuals with disabilities are able to save. They could use it as a saving account or as a checking account. They could receive their paycheck in there. Or it could be used as a different type of vehicle, depending on how they want to use it. It could be for daily expenses, or it could be even to save for retirement, if that's how they want to utilize it. And so the options provided for investments are really the individual and the family probably have to think about what is the purpose of the account. Is it to help the individual with daily needs, or is it to think about their future? So the investments need to really be in line with those thoughts, with the age of the individual, with the purpose of the savings. But the options that we provide with the New Hampshire Able Plan are really great options. I mean, it really is right now the plan has 7 type of options, strategies. It could go from aggressive, again, depending on the type of objective that the individual and the family would like to save, or again, conservative, so they can use it for their everyday expenses. So the option is there, the ability to choose and to design something really powerful for the individual and the family is definitely there. And as Chuck mentioned before, this is, similar to a college savings account. It's been proven that a college savings account has helped many students and families save for college over time. And so this could definitely do the same thing. It could definitely create, wealth, and again, it could do both. It could just provide and assist the individuals and the families, or it could provide, help them provide wealth without jeopardizing the benefits that they receive. So at a high level, again, right now we have 7 options to invest. There will be soon there are plans to add one more, this is what we discuss when we meet with the National Able Alliance. The 19 states get together. They decide what type of investments we're going to have in this plan, and that is essentially reviewed on a regular basis. So the oversight and the fiduciary responsibility that all of these states are part of this consortium, we're really invested in this work and this account. So other than that, I mean, again, a high level is the Enable account is very easy to open with only $25. Funds can also be rolled over from if there is an existing 529 account that perhaps was saved and wasn't fully utilized. Funds can come also as a contribution. Chuck mentioned earlier that the yearly contribution is 18,000. So that goes with the gift. That's related to the tax code. So for example, in this year it's 18,000, but next year is going to be 19,000. So that is adjusted by the IRS every year. So I think that's essentially what I wanted to highlight. There's a checking account that is part of this plan. It's definitely an easy way to also utilize the funds once they're in the account. A debit card is also part of this. They have the option to choose for a debit card or a checking account. So it has options, flexibility for the individuals who own these accounts. And
Yeah, I
Chuck,
think
I'll
that's
turn it
great.
over to you.
No, I think and I will say, I just have to say, from my position, it truly is a very fortunate situation that the way the legislature fashioned New Hampshire's Able Savings, you have the treasurer and you have the executive directors working hand in hand. And I will tell you, especially when it comes to the investments, and Monica, her predecessor, very invested in this program for the state of New Hampshire, because the power for the individual it truly is remarkable. I'll also point out, and again, what we've seen happen. So in 2026, right now I said age of eligibility is 26. That is going up to 46 in 2026. Another big change. That's known as the Able Age Adjustment Act. So I think it's January of 26. That's going to open the door to many individuals. We see that with post-traumatic stress, TBI, things that may actually, incidences that may happen after the age of 26. As Monica had also said, you can use it as an investment account and you can use it as an everyday account. And that's really, I would say, is the benefits here. Again, special needs trusts have their place. But for an individual to have a debit card, to have a checking account, and to be able to have that freedom to make his or her own decision what they're spending the expenses on, it truly is remarkable. So again, that's the NH-ABLE plan at a very high level. I hope it helps, and
Thank you.
we're more than happy to assist.
Okay, would you be able to take some questions?
Oh,
from the-
absolutely.
Okay,
Yes.
all right,
Absolutely.
thank you. Okay, does anyone have any questions? Representative Lamontagne.
What would the advantages, what are the specific advantages to having an ABLE account versus having a family member just keep a savings account for that person? Like, could you explain that?
It's a great question. And I would answer it this way. So the benefit of the, and if you'd like,
No, go ahead.
I'll
Go
go
ahead,
ahead and
sure.
we can go back and forth.
I mean,
So the-
I'm just going to say I speak that way because in our family's case, my stepdaughter would not be able to manage the account on her own. But I realize that many with people with disabilities, of course, can.
Right.
But how does it work to their advantage?
Yeah, and it's a great question. So the benefit of opening an Enable account is that if the individual is receiving needs-based benefits, the SSI or Medicaid or the housing benefits, when the individual is examined by those entities to see whether or not they qualify, the monies in the account are not looked at. So that's where the threshold comes in, the $2,000. Traditionally, anything in, and I say this because I know that there are so many people behind me that know this firsthand. When you go over that 2,000, family members had to make a decision. And I'm going to go one step further. This was not unique to New Hampshire.
Right.
This was across the country. So it's not, I mean, I say that because what individuals did, and we've heard the stories, we'll use a grandmother. If a grandmother was going to give a gift, well, maybe you shouldn't. Or if you do give the gift, we have to spend it. That's the old spend down. We have to, ensure that it doesn't go into that bucket that can be looked at. So that's that. Did you want me to go on? If an individual can't manage the account, there is so if the person is not legally competent, if there's a guardian involved, the guardian can open the account and manage it for the individual. We see that in certain situations where the Office of Public Guardian can open the account on behalf, and that qualifies. Also, if the person is able to open up the account, that person can name under a POA, under power of attorney, someone who can work with them to manage that account.
Yeah, a follow up.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I understand that part of
Okay,
it, but
yes.
like if someone set up a savings account specifically for
Right.
the individual, not in their name, they can likewise
Right.
hide that money from being held against the individual. But I was wondering, what are the other, any other specific tax or technical
Oh, I see what you're
advantages
saying. Okay.
to this account versus just a savings account held in someone else's name?
Right.
Yeah, so regarding the tax, that's definitely a key point. And that is exactly what I was mentioning earlier. If you're able to save money in this ABLE account, the earnings will grow tax free. Again, if you used the funds for disability expenses compared to a regular savings account, the person will pay taxes regardless of how they use the funds. But the benefit, so two huge benefits. Again, it protects the assets, can be under the beneficiary name, the person with a disability, and also the tax implications at the federal level are really important.
Thank you. Yeah.
Any further questions from anyone?
I do have
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
yeah, when I first saw the brochure that the disability had to have an onset by age 26, that leaves a lot of people out, and 46 is much better. But why have that age limit at all when you think of all the seniors who are struggling and perhaps trying to save money, that they also risk losing their benefits? I know you didn't write the initial legislation, but what are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, from our perspective, if an individual has a disability, greater access, greater accessibility, and that's why when we saw it, the Able Age Adjustment Act came about. For lack of a better term, we knew that was huge. The veterans that are coming back,
Yeah.
over 26, and I would defer to Monica
Yeah.
on this. You may know this, and because we do get the question, how did they come up with 26 at the federal level? And I think it had like
Yeah.
essentially like I would assume like a fiscal note attached to it, and they had to do whatever it had to get this thing passed, so to speak, in 2014.
I will probably say that. I don't know the details exactly why the age of 26, but typically the federal government obviously has to do with the fiscal impact. So they're obviously whatever benefits they're going to provide, they're also looking at their checkbook. So I think that's part of the
Yeah.
reason. So there was a lot of advocacy to change the law to be able to increase the age, knowing that how much money was going to cost the federal government for that change. So it has to do with how much money they're going to give up in their taxes.
All right, well, there aren't any other questions. I have a couple. At this time, how close are you to capacity on how many people could take advantage of this program? How much room for growth do you have?
We have a lot of room for growth. If we were able to benefit every single individual and every single family in New Hampshire, we should be able to. Absolutely.
Definitely. That's the hope. And I will tell you, consumers and advocates and the entire, and again, I know it sounds somewhat of a cliche, but we all get it in this room. New Hampshire does do it differently. I mean, many of the advocates that have spoken here that are in the room today, parents, they will get the word out. But obviously we're always, Monica and I and our staffs are always doing the best we can to ensure that individuals know about the NH-ABLE plan. And we have very robust social media. We do whatever we can to get that info out.
My other question is, would you feel comfortable about giving us like an anonymous case study of how someone used this money to do something regarding housing?
Yeah, regarding housing, you know, I'd like to get back to you on that if I
Okay.
may. However, I can give you, we know that it has had, and again, this is just from memory and, when we were, again, when I say we, things have changed so much over the years. When we first launched in 2017, we were canvassing the state with in-person meetings. That's changed a bit, now that people understand ABLE and they're enrolling on their own, and that's wonderful. But just when we look at qualified disability expenses, transportation was huge for individuals. We've got that back, individuals who have bought automobiles as a result of, that basic living expenses. Because again, and I say this, I always say this up front, special needs trusts are very important. But again, it's a trust. So there's going to be, from what I understand, there's certain reporting requirements, and there's a trustee, a little bit different with ABLE accounts because you're able to actually get in there and handle it and spend it on that basic living expense. There are individuals who have bought, and I remember this from being on the road, just for basic living expenses, if it was an individual with autism spectrum disorder, that individual may bought whatever they needed to ensure that they were regulated. And that could be a personal trampoline. And I know that the trampoline in and of itself may seem small, but it was a big deal to the parents. And technology, education, we've heard those stories. As far as housing, we again, just this is from memory, I'm fairly certain that individuals who had a special needs trust funded the ABLE account, and then they actually paid their rent out of the ABLE account, which again, they were able to pay the check over to the landlord. But if it's okay, Chair, I can get back to you and see if we can give you a few case studies and to see how they were actually utilized.
That would be terrific.
Sure.
I'd like to include those in the report. Does anyone have any other questions? Representative Yokella, go ahead.
I feel like this is a little bit kind of in the weeds and maybe outside the scope of this, the topic that we're covering, but I'm just curious, as you mentioned the difference in reporting requirements, how, if they have a check or they have a ATM card, how are you guys managing that as far as making sure that it's a qualified expense? Are they having to submit receipts and stuff like that? Is because like generally what I'm thinking of is like FSA accounts, you get a card and you go to the grocery store and there's specific labels that say like this will qualify, this won't qualify, kind of a thing, and it won't even spend the money if you don't. But like a check would not have that requirement, or and you have things on the list like, you know, a video game, right? The video game may be exercise or not. How are you guys determining all of that? Just curious.
Yeah, I can follow.
Okay.
Sure, go right ahead.
Yeah, and what I can share is folks don't have to submit receipts, and it's sort of like folks are recommended to keep track of their expenses. So in case they're audited, because again, this has to do with, in the case of the IRS, you are subject as a taxpayer to be audited. So if by chance you are lucky enough to be picked, then you need to be able to provide documentation, first of all, that you qualify for an able account, and then also that your expenses were qualified. So it is recommended that you keep track. The system or the type of, for example, if a debit card is used, a lot of times the actual expense will show up in the record as the type of expense that what the person bought with that money. The checking account the same. So it really is recommended to keep records to be able to prove that those expenses are qualified expenses. The other thing, that if by chance a person spends money on items that are not qualified, the account owner will be subject to a 10% penalty, and also will have to pay the tax for that amount of money. So it has some consequences if it's not, again, it is to provide the benefits, the tax benefit, but in the event if it's not used for that purpose, there are those, that's the consequence, to pay the tax on that money and also a 10% penalty.
Yeah, well stated. What we have heard, Representative, and we've been at it for a while, it's a legitimate question. You're right, because we'll hear that in the field. What do I do? Do I keep the receipts? What if I'm audited? Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, you should. I always equate it to the IRS, as Monica had stated. If I say I gave X amount as a charitable donation, keep the receipt or keep your canceled check or whatever. So that's a necessity. And we also get questions when we're presenting, well, would this be a qualified disability expense? Well, it really is subjective. But again, at the national level, being part of the 19 states, taking part in national discussions, there has never, able accounts at the federal level and at the state level, there's an encouragement to open them. We're not looking to treat it as a penalty or as draconian. We want this to happen. And I think that really was the legislative intent. And it's not to downplay what you just said, because you're right. I mean, at the end of the day, you want to know. But we highly advise the individuals, is the expense related to the disability? That's number one. And does it look to benefit health, independence of the individual? So once you apply, it can be referred to as like a two-pronged test. That can be, you have to look at it. I don't, there are some that I use this as an example. An individual with a disability is going to a friend's birthday party, and he doesn't drive, but he takes an Uber. Well, the Uber, the way I look at it, is a qualified disability expense related to the disability, inures to the benefit. And however, the birthday gift that he is giving to the individual, if it's a cash gift, that's not going to fall within the QDE. But again, it's very subjective. We've never, again, and we're like most state agencies, we're very hands-on, as the legislature is. I have never heard of a story where an expense was either questioned or audited, and that's a good thing. But again, I think it goes to I'm hoping it goes to the legislative intent when we look back at why we have them. But it's a great question, because it's legitimate. I mean, I would want to know, am I going to get audited? What do I do with my receipts? Is this an expense?
Any other questions? Is there anything you'd like to say before we go on to the next speaker?
Would you like to give a close?
No, well, thank you for the opportunity to speak about these accounts. Certainly, what I would like to say is we would like to do more and promote this program more. Unfortunately, our resources are limited, so if there is ways and opportunities that we could contribute to promote this program and the benefit of these accounts, we'll be happy to be part of that. And again, the work that you're doing here, happy to contribute and come back for it. If you need additional information, happy to do that.
Great, thank you so much.
Thank you so much for the opportunity, representative and members of this committee. And it's a great committee, and we're glad that we were here, and we're more than happy to assist whichever way we can.
Terrific,
Okay.
thank you so much for
Thank
coming.
you.
Thank you.
All
Okay.
right, thank you. Okay. Next up, I have Susan Silsby from Easter Seals, New Hampshire.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, thank you for coming.
So my name is Sue Silsby. I'm the Executive Vice President at Easter Seals, New Hampshire, where I've worked for the last 36 years. I want to thank you for the opportunity to speak to you this afternoon. In my role, I'm responsible for program operations, serving over 15,000 children, adults, seniors, and veterans across New Hampshire. Many of those are diagnosed with physical, cognitive, or mental health disabilities. Housing stability is a vital social determinant that contributes to one's overall health and well-being, and access to affordable, safe, accessible housing is a common concern that we hear from those we serve. Today, I would like to speak specifically to highlight the impact that the lack of housing has on one of the most vulnerable populations in New Hampshire, individuals with developmental and intellectual disabilities. For over 35 years, Easter Seals has served this population, and we're currently the largest private provider of developmental services in New Hampshire, serving 243 adults on an annual basis. The primary model for providing residential services to this population is a shared living model, where agencies contract with an individual, couple, or family to provide room and board and care to an individual in a private home, in the contractor's home. While this model has worked out beautifully for so many people, some people living their lifetime with the contracted family, for others, it hasn't worked out as well. It has led to homelessness, emergency placement, and unnecessary hospitalizations. Easter Seals currently serves 90 people in shared living homes, and in looking at our average placements, about 5.2 years. So on average, people are moving every 5 years. Families are looking for a choice in the model of residential service delivery. They want a model that offers more permanent housing, one that you can stay in the same community and age in place. In an effort to increase housing options for this population, there are groups of families all over the state. I've met with several of them. There's also a developer who are really working to create permanent housing solutions. They have to raise money privately, taking years to get the money to secure the property, to renovate the property, also dealing with some regulatory barriers. Meanwhile, aging families are struggling to provide care to their loved ones, and individuals have limited options for residential services. In addition, Easter Seals, it should just not be this hard for families to find permanent housing solutions for their loved ones. In addition, Easter Seals operates 21 staffed residential programs with 57 beds for individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities who experience high needs in the areas of behavioral regulation and medical needs. These homes are smaller in nature, typically 1 to 4 beds, to ensure high quality care and successful integration into the community. These homes provide stable housing, 24/7 staffing, clinical services, transportation, recreational and employment opportunities. Services are billed through the Medicaid waiver, and housing expenses, room and board expenses are not allowable expenses. Individuals living in these programs receive Social Security benefits in the amount of $824 per month, which needs to cover all housing expenses, food, utilities, maintenance, utilities. We typically budget about $350 a month for food, which leaves about $474 a month to pay for the rest of the bill, the housing expenses, which, as you can imagine, doesn't cover it. Market rents have reached an all-time high in New Hampshire. We are experiencing rents for a 3-bedroom property from $2,700 to $3,000 a month for a property that's suitable, while the reimbursement from the individuals is $1,400 for all expenses. The Bureau of Developmental Services does have access to state funding to bridge the funding gap. However, there's not sufficient funding. At this time, that funding is not available to every person in this model of care, and there's a wait list for anyone new. It's just not a sustainable business model for private providers, and as a result, many providers have stopped providing this level of care. Our inability to support New Hampshire providers to develop and maintain housing has led to costly out-of-state placements. Currently, New Hampshire has approximately 50 individuals in out-of-state placements, a scenario which is not only expensive, but very difficult on the individuals and their families. Recently, there was a round of ARPA funding that has provided startup resources for some private providers to develop new residential options in New Hampshire, which is amazing. However, the long-term fiscal sustainability for the housing isn't clear. I urge a study committee to examine and review potential funding streams and regulatory barriers to ensure that all New Hampshire residents, especially those with the greatest needs, have access to affordable, permanent housing in their home state of New Hampshire. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anyone have questions? Representative Yokella first, and then Representative. Okay.
Thank you. Maybe I'm just trying to get some clarification on some of those numbers that
Yeah.
you were throwing
Of
out.
course.
You said $824 is from SSI for the disability. And you said that there's Medicaid money for
For services.
for
Yes.
non-housing services.
Correct.
And then you said $1,400.
Correct. So
And so I'm wondering if that where that $1,400 is coming.
Okay.
Is that from the people?
So basically, there's an 824 standard of need, it's called. And so when you back out the food, right, of $350 a month from the 824, it leaves like $474 per
Yeah.
person times
That's what I
three.
have. Yeah.
Times three is the 1,400. Roughly.
Times 3.
Most of
people
the,
living
it was based on a 3-person home. Sorry.
Okay. So you're.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry.
So. Okay. So you're giving me the amount of money. You also in your statement said that you're housing between 1 and 4 people
Correct.
in a room or in a
house. I mean,
House.
typically they're three bedrooms typically. So there are some programs where there's one person that's staffed 24/7, but typically we have 3-bedroom homes.
Okay. So, and can
Go ahead.
thanks. So I'm trying to a little bit understand how your program works. So it's you're renting a house, and then you are asking for applications for people that want to come live in the house, and then you would be offering services to all of the people that are part of that house. And that would be kind of like the facility.
Correct.
And then you rinse and repeat. You do that again and again.
Yeah, these are community-based long-term supports and services homes, typically 3 bedrooms. Correct. We are in rental properties across the state where 3 individuals who have common support needs are living together, and we provide services billed to the Medicaid waiver. And then where we're struggling is just the room and board and housing expenses as the housing expenses have increased.
Okay. And so you said that there's a 24/7 services. And so that made me think of like you have someone there 24/7, or you have like houses around like a common structure where they could go service people 24/7. So how does the 24/7?
So these are homes that are in the community,
Yeah.
and the house is like staffed with shift staff in,
Okay.
in a specific house located in the community, and the individuals are accessing their community. So each home is a unique program. It's not a campus.
Okay.
They're living in their home communities.
That's, okay. So the people that are all living in the same structure, are you trying to get them with similar needs so that they can utilize the same personnel, or you have multiple, like one personnel per person 24/7?
No, it's not one-on-one 24/7. The support needs are really designed based on, someone's individual service plan.
Yeah.
And typically they're shared staff, like there might be one staff overnight for the 3 individuals. Typically the service needs are similar.
Okay.
So either people might have like, a lot of medical needs and need for, accessible housing, maybe increased nursing, and it's shared staffing.
Okay.
And it's based on the service plan and their individual needs.
And you have 90 people.
So we have 90 people in our shared living homes, which is the foster care like adult foster care homes.
Okay. So that's a different category than
Two
this
different
one.
things. Yeah.
This one, how many homes do you have?
We have 21 certified residents.
Right. Okay. I
Yep.
wrote that down. 25
Yep.
with 57 beds.
21 with
Is that-
57
that's-
beds. Yep.
That's this note.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
All
Sorry.
right. Thank you very much.
Sorry.
Just
It's complicated. We're
It is
learning.
complicated.
Representative Lamontagne, you had a question?
Yeah, I'm trying to understand it all too. But how does
It made sense to me. I'm sorry.
that the residential service programs, how do they differ from what we used to know as a group home? And did Easter Seals have group homes?
We didn't start out having resident group homes back in the day. We were later to the residential service market. I think what's changed over time is really the size of the home, as well as like the involvement in the community, and making sure that the services provided are really promoting inclusion, employment, and belonging in the community. I think that's the biggest difference over time.
I guess my question is, well, we had an incident in Manchester over the summer where there was an individual living in a placement similar to this, and he kept leaving the building, and the neighbor, showing up in the neighbors' yards, and they didn't know him, and they, his behaviors were, they felt threatened by him. So do you get a lot of pushback in the neighborhoods where you're trying to place these individuals? And,
This is a great question, and sadly, yes. We haven't opened a new home for a while, but often, it's scary for neighbors because they don't know what they don't know. We take great care in siting and where we have these homes. So while we are in the community, we really think about the neighbors, the neighbor relations, and how to promote people in like valued social roles. But there definitely still is some concern with neighbors in terms of not having these types of homes in their neighborhood. I also think you need to take great care in screening the clinical needs of the residents and ensuring that you have the staffing support, the clinical backup, the clinical support, and the backup to respond to appropriately to behavioral situations that might arise.
Okay, I guess the other question that I would ask is that my assumption is that you're using existing buildings for these placements for folks. Do you find that there are barriers for the kinds of care that individuals with disabilities might need because of the fact that you're using existing buildings?
Yes. So we're in rental properties for most of the homes that we have. And I think when it comes to accessibility, that's the biggest barrier we see. So for folks who need fully accessible showers, lifts, ceiling lifts, there are not a lot of rental properties that accommodate those folks' needs.
And just to follow up, you mostly have rental properties. Is that because purchasing properties is too expensive, or it creates certain complications that make it harder for you to deliver services?
Yeah, I mean, the housing market is really expensive right now, and it has been. So we have chosen to rent over buy just due to the cost and the funding streams to cover, all of when you own a house, the repairs and the ongoing upkeep. It's just really not a lot of funding to cover that.
Okay, and Representative Yokella?
So I'm very surprised that you rent, because that makes me think that, as the rents rise and the that you could be it leaves you open to not being able to have those 21 facilities, right? Especially when like the landlord no longer wants to continue the renew a lease or something like that, right? It seems like there's a lot of variability in that model. Are you aware of any other groups that do a similar model that purchase, or are you pretty
There
much
are.
the only one?
There are. And in this recent round of ARPA funding, which
Yeah.
was specifically designed for new beds, we were approved to purchase one of our homes. So we are purchasing one home. We're also renovating another home that we own. So we are moving to more of a owned model for that very reason.
Yes, it seems like fixed cost, like being able to have a 30-year mortgage or whatever, like that you could have certain amount of obviously the repairs would be variable, but the rent essentially could be foreseen in a longer range. Have you had to close any places because of increased rent, kind of priced you out of the $1,400 that you
I mean,
have
we've been
to-
subsidizing it, and the bureau's worked hard to, to access the state funds, so to help bridge that. So that's helped us. We have not closed any due to that, but we are evaluating our ability to continue to provide that level of care. And that's where the ownership is starting to especially when we got the ARPA funds to be able to purchase, the property that we have in Ware, New Hampshire. It will help us greatly.
I would like to follow up again if you're fine.
Go right ahead.
Okay. I also have some questions about the you said that the neighbors, as far as not being happy that you're going to move in or something, but it, it would still be a residential building, and the building is already existing, right? So how do the neighbors come involved at all, right? You're just renting a building from someone, and then there's essentially like 3 roommates living in a building. So how do the neighbors have an impact on
So,
you?
so sometimes the neighbors will hear about us, about who's moving in. I'm not sure how. And, you know, once we're there, there's 3 shifts a day. So it's a little different than other, you know, their neighbors. People might see individuals with disabilities and draw conclusions. So, and then at times we've gone to different towns when we've opened it to just be good partners to say we're opening up. And sometimes that has opened up, you know, some issues for us. Yep.
And those, can you specify those issues? Do they want to zone it like say that you have to be in a commercial property or something like that, or how are they creating barriers?
So when, I mean, this is a while ago, but yes, we had some issues with people saying, "Oh no, this is not residential. This is a business. You know, this is," and you know, we're not. We push back. It's a residential program. 3 unrelated individuals live there, and eventually we get, you know, we get through, but it just isn't always the best experience.
Okay. Does anyone have any other questions? Yeah. Go right ahead.
I think this, based on your model, it seems like you're not required to be licensed in each of these. You're essentially utilizing the certification model of the licensure requirements of New Hampshire.
So we do
Yes.
have 2 properties that are licensed. If it's over 3 beds, it needs to be licensed. So if there's over 3 beds, it has to be licensed. So we have 2 4-bed programs.
Is that because you told them that you could potentially have a 4th person, or because there's literally like 4 bedrooms, and even if you only kept 3 people in there all the time, then it would not be considered it?
If we had 3 people there, it would be certified, but we have 4 individuals
Okay.
living there.
Okay, so
And those are homes that are specially designed for people who need full accessibility. And there's four bedrooms, you know, full roll-in shower and lifts in the ceilings and, you know, everything that they need to live in the community.
okay, thank you.
Yeah. So if I could just follow up on
Yeah.
this line of questioning. These, you've created a facility for 4 people that it sounds like it was probably pretty expensive to make sure you could have the lifts and the bathrooms and additional expense and so forth. What was the limiting factor to 4 people? Because, you know, potentially maybe you could have 6 people living in a facility where you've invested so much in.
I mean, this is a residential home, so there were, like, that was repurposed. The landlord actually did all of the
Oh,
renovations.
nice.
So just wasn't 6 bedrooms.
Okay. But the fact that you could put in an extra person in there made the finances work out better because you were getting income from another person. Or
I mean, the finances don't really
They
work
never-
out, but I mean, I think it helps with this, you know, the staffing resources on the service side. And again, it's just those beds that can support individuals who need fully accessible housing. They're pretty rare.
This is. Thank you so much for coming. This is very interesting.
So I assume that the 4 bedroom place that you've now have licensed, and all of this work installed. You're renting,
We are.
and how do you decide, that you're going to try and invest that time and money in such in a situation like that rental? Like, how do you make that choice? And is that something that is difficult or made harder because it's renting? Or do you guys kind of like the landlord invested a bunch into it also, so you guys are kind of tied together at the hip?
In this case, the two cases, the landlord received some grant funding to renovate the property.
Okay.
For us to build or buy something equivalent would be cost prohibitive.
Okay. Interesting. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you so much for coming.
You're welcome.
This was very informative. I have your email address, so if we have any further questions, I may reach out to you again.
Absolutely.
And thank you again for coming.
Yeah. Thank you.
All right, next up on the agenda is Housing Action New Hampshire. Just come on up and state your name and.
Madam Chair, members of the study committee, for the record, my name is Alyssa Margolin. I serve as Director of Housing Action New Hampshire. Thank you for your work on this committee. I was at your inaugural meeting and have caught up on the other presentations that you've had. What I thought I would do for you today is talk with you about policy proposals that have made their way through the legislature and things that are likely on the horizon as you consider what your study committee might recommend to the legislature moving forward. I know that you dug deep into the challenges of rental subsidies. You had a really robust conversation with New Hampshire Housing about the Housing Choice Voucher Program. You learned about the long waiting lists, about some of the priorities put on those waiting lists. And I know Senator Ricciardi was aghast to learn that you get a preference if you have a fatal illness, but you're likely to wait for 2 years. And I guess I have some thoughts about that conversation that you had on the committee. I'll share that. I think at the federal level and the advocacy that we do with our congressional delegation, and our congressional delegation is all have proven to be very interested in trying to come up with solutions to our housing crisis and have weighed in everywhere they can. But I will say more broadly, one of the challenges is that rental subsidies make up over 90% of HUD's budget now. And that is creating just overall budgetary challenges and undermining the likelihood that they will add additional vouchers. So I don't think that we will see a real push to increase vouchers that come to the states through housing and urban development. I do think that there is some momentum around bringing back in some form the emergency rental assistance program that we had during ARPA. And obviously it'll depend on the direction of the next administration, but that proved a really important tool to many states, and there is some momentum there. What I do want to contemplate, though, is other state solutions around bridges to Section 8. And I think you heard the success of the Housing Bridge Subsidy Program for people with severe and persistent mental illness. And that resulted in the Olmstead settlement during the Obama administration with the state of New Hampshire that does create a subsidy for that population. And they work closely with New Hampshire Housing. And I think Mr. McClellan told you about the 811 program. So essentially a state temporary subsidy until you access, till you're able to work through the waiting list on Section 8. So something to consider there. I want to speak again about the need for more advocacy to the Department of Health and Human Services to finally operationalize the new supportive housing Medicaid benefit. The legislature directed the Department of Health and Human Services to apply for this state plan amendment in 2019. CMS approved the supportive housing Medicaid benefit in 2022, and we are still waiting for the department to operationalize this. This would cover supportive housing services for accessing housing and also to ongoing services needed to sustain housing. The department did announce the credentialing opportunity to providers in the summer of this year, but it is being held up again. So I think more advocacy from the legislature directed to the department to operationalize this benefit is needed at this time. Finally, I'll jump to the capital subsidies. Again, you learned a lot from Mr. McClellan and learning about how below market rate capital is attractive to developers and that those developers pass on those savings they're getting by not going in traditional debt into affordability, and that they are often partnered with either housing choice voucher acceptance or project-based vouchers. What I want to advocate for is increasing the overall resource to the Affordable Housing Fund. I think you've seen this in a lot of the candidates' plans who are running for governor. And I do want to caution against designating funding to a certain population. And I say this from experience. One of the first appropriations I secured as a new director at Housing Action New Hampshire was designated to people recovering from opioid disorders, and it proved very difficult developer to disseminate and allocate. It was after that we started to advocate for flexibility in the fund. Developers who serve certain populations are very motivated to serve that population generally, and I think we've learned that allowing those developers to respond to market needs, population needs in a larger, more flexible fund is a better policy solution than chopping it up and saying this is for this population and that population. So with that, I'll say that we have been advocating for a change in the real estate transfer tax carve-out formula that goes to the Affordable Housing Fund. We think that $5 million per year is really insufficient given the crisis, and would like to see that formula changed in the next budget cycle to at least 2 times the current formula. And last year when this was proposed, although it was an off-budget year, it did have a bipartisan support, and it did have support of the New Hampshire Realtors in addition to Housing Action New Hampshire. I want to also bring up some other state level, these are more low-hanging fruit opportunities. I think it's come up, the expansion of 79E and what that could provide. So we have had successful legislation last year to expand this, enable municipalities to offer this benefit. And so I think that there could be a willingness to work with that tool. And I also think that the Council on Housing Stability is an interesting entity to look at. That has really heightened coordination among state agencies and advocates for different populations. And I think it would be helpful to have a member of the disability community, 1 or 2 members added to the Council on Housing Stability. The Council on Housing Stability was created by executive order by Governor Sununu at the start of the pandemic, but the legislature codified it. And so it could be amended now in statute to add additional members to the council. I also want to name another recent legislative success, and that is the launch of the Housing Champion Program. And I believe, Representative Yokela, you sat on the advisory committee for that program. That program was recently launched, like maybe 2 weeks ago, by Business and Economic Affairs and announced to municipalities, and will provide incentives for infrastructure dollars through designation and recognition as a housing champion community. And there may be an opportunity to work with the Office of Planning and Development to add criteria around accessible design and other issues to integrate the needs of housing for people with disabilities into that program. Finally, I want to talk about the need for the state to set more reasonable standards at the local level. We're often, when we discuss proposals like improving New Hampshire's accessory dwelling unit law or allowing single-family property owners to turn their single family into a duplex, triplex, or fourplex, we're often find ourselves in a age-old policy debate about local control versus state mandates. And I don't think it needs to be an either or, but I do think that the state could say when local municipalities have overregulated to the point where they're forcing their own members of their community to leave. And so in some cases, when a property owner wants to create an accessory dwelling unit for their child with disabilities, they should be allowed to do that by right. If a property owner wants to create a duplex or triplex because they want support services in their home, they should be allowed to do so by right. And the state has the ability to set that reasonable standard for our localities. And so I think you'll likely see proposals. There are already LSRs for next year around accessory dwelling unit law again. I know parking came up at a recent hearing here, and indeed, Representative Yokela, HB 1400, a bill that you sponsored, does do just that, where the state says a more reasonable parking standard for municipalities is 1.5 spaces for multifamily 10 units or more, but also for studios and one bedrooms that meet the standards of the workforce housing law. So some progress and something to build on there. And with that, I think I'll conclude and just take your questions.
Questions? I have one. I am a huge fan of the every other Friday calls that New Hampshire Housing does. And one of the people that you had on was Carmen Lorenz from Laconia. And she was talking about how they were trying to build a supportive housing structure in Laconia on a lot. And the problem was, now this was supportive housing, so I'm assuming that, these people, many of them didn't drive, but they couldn't make the project pencil with the amount of parking that the city was requiring to build this facility. So how often does that happen?
So first of all, Representative, thank you for the shout out for Housing Action New Hampshire's Housing Matters Zooms. And thank you for participating in those. I think that's why you saw us push so hard on HB 1400 last year. And if I recall, the Committee of Conference conversation was actually Representative Sweeney who noted that he wakes up to that he rents in Salem and that he wakes up to empty parking spots where he rents every day, and that frustrated him because that could be that infrastructure, that developable land would be a good place for more housing or business, and that requiring this paving in a formula that doesn't align with the community needs didn't make sense. So I think the state in that case, sets a more reasonable standard. It also in HB 1400, it also requires that municipalities accept alternative parking solutions. So you've been talking with families and with with tenants, part of our rental community, rental population here who doesn't drive. So why are we requiring that they have 2 parking spots per bedroom? That doesn't make sense. So for some cases now, municipalities must accept solutions. They can challenge that solution if they don't think it meets needs. But now you've opened that door through state policy. And I was thinking, I know Representative Stab, we talked about bringing some developers to your committee. And so Lakes Region Community Developers was one that I was thinking of bringing forward. I know you had a member of their board here recently who also works for Lakes Region Community Services.
Yeah. Well, yeah, this is our final meeting before we have to do our
Your initial report, right? But
yes,
you're going to
preliminary
continue,
report,
right?
but we will be continuing on for a year. And we would certainly love to hear from developers about the challenges that they are facing. Does anyone have any questions? Representative Yokella.
Thank you for your work on 1400 and the housing champion project. I believe in the housing champion rules. I mean, at least there was the discussion about kind of mixed use housing, or like housing with businesses in kind of in the same area or vicinity, or even in the same building. And I don't know if it became part of the rules or not, whether they get points for having that. But it seems, from my perspective, in the testimony that we've heard in this, which obviously came later than the rule setting, it seems like the access to the services by the people with disabilities could be a barrier to getting them kind of out in the community, or getting them even to be kind of independent at all. And I'm wondering if that was one of the things that kind of like jumped out to me as in the last few weeks. I'm wondering if you had any thoughts or insights about like kind of those mixed use buildings, and where they like the past legislation on it, and if housing champion, if you know offhand, if housing champion did anything trying to encourage that.
So thank you for the question, and thank you for your participation in the Housing Champion Advisory Board. I know the rules passed JALCAR this summer, but I haven't looked at them in a while, so I'd have to look and get back to you, Representative. I do think that another reason that the Affordable Housing Fund is so important to our state is it allows for that creativity. So a lot of federal money comes with restrictions on, and you learned a lot about that. But the having in the capital stack that kind of flexible resource. So if you want to do something like mixed use, or if you want part of it to be market rate, you can do that with the Affordable Housing Fund. And New Hampshire's had a state housing trust fund since 1988, but it's only in the last couple of budget cycles that we actually started putting any money in it at all. The formula for the real estate transfer tax carve out is quite new. And I think we've learned how valuable it is as we've gotten deeper and deeper into the crisis, but the formula hasn't changed. And so I think that is just another argument for that. But I don't know. I would have to look on the Housing Champions to see. And I hear what you're saying in terms of you wouldn't want to put some broad criteria in places where it wouldn't make sense because of the population needs. So I would need to look, you would need to look at the at how the program's being rolled out. But I name it as the state is making investments in this direction to deal with a housing crisis. So let's make sure that the interests of these populations are at the table and being served as we as a state invest in these solutions.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I think that kind of like the walkability and also being able to have, you know, services that are provided to you look close to you is important. You know, we've talked many times about the people that don't drive in here and stuff like that. Just being able to kind of get out and into the community. That can be a barrier with kind of the zoning, like all the business over here and your residential stuff is over here. But I wanted to kind of touch on what we talked about or what we were hearing a little bit earlier, about how the business was renting these homes to provide services to the community. And it also seems like, you know, there's a capital kind of cost that was a barrier for getting purchasing of these facilities. Is there anything that New Hampshire housing that jumped out to you in that conversation, I guess, that New Hampshire housing could currently do to help secure funding or to provide interest, you know, free loans or whatever, or is that something that is possible to be done through New Hampshire housing if it needs a new program to be able to meet that need, or is there something that can do that now?
Okay, I do want to note that, you know, Easter Seals is probably one of the most successful providers in our state for this
Yeah.
population and most sustainable model. So I trust if they've decided to have a rental model or ownership model that they're
Yeah.
making good fiscal decisions given how they've grown and served the most people in our state. And I also know that, you know, the leadership there is very familiar with the capital and rental subsidy tools available through our state housing finance agency because they've done work with that agency. But also to clarify for this committee, we are the Advocates Housing Action New Hampshire, and
Yeah.
so we're not
Yeah.
I'm not employed by New Hampshire Housing Finance Authority, so I don't want to speak to what their programs could do. I do want to name that the special, I'm going to get the title wrong, Commission on Opioid Settlements has designated a fund specifically for supportive housing for people with opioid and substance use disorders again, and that they are launching a separate initiative there. And I would ask New Hampshire Housing to name, I believe it's $6 million for 3 years and could renew as part of the opioid settlement that came to the state. And so to answer your question, I think there are tools that you could create, but I would caution against creating them within the trust fund because you don't want to start. Once you start doing that, it's like hard to return to flexibility, but I do think you could have special initiatives for specific population, but I would defer to our colleagues at who create those kind of financial products and underwriting projects.
Okay.
Representative Lamontagne.
Could you explain a little more what are the 79E programs in municipalities?
Yeah, so 79E exists in statute, right? It's and the state simply enabled it to expand it. In 1400, it expanded 79E to be used for commercial conversions, but essentially it would be up to the municipality to offer that. And I think in the community toolbox bill that we passed in 2017, I believe, it was the first time we started to look at 79E as a tool that allowed for municipalities to do it just to incentivize workforce housing. But then we expanded it to say, if you want, you could also incentivize a developer through tax deferral on commercial conversions as well.
Any more questions? Okay,
No,
well,
thank you.
all right. Thank you so much for
Thank you.
coming. Okay. All right, we have one more person on the agenda, and that would be Lori McIntosh, who has a statement for us. And then we'll have to look over the minutes and accept those. Does he have a copy of the minutes? Thank you. Thank you. Laura. Does have a copy of the minutes?
My name's Lori McIntosh, and I'm with Our Place NH. A few weeks ago, I made a statement in this room that I would like to retract. I apologize to the committee and in particular to Senator Ricciardi for criticizing a new project that would house adults with developmental disabilities. I did something that I'm famous for, and that's opening my mouth before activating my brain. We need all kinds of housing models and choices for people with disabilities. What might be right for one person is not necessarily right for someone else. I cannot disparage a well-run group home model. In fact, there is a wonderful group home in Portsmouth that I'm well familiar with, where the residents are extremely happy and thriving. And I'm sure the Easter Seals group homes are great too. So to set the record straight, I'm glad that Senator Ricciardi was able to help obtain funding for that project, and any effort to provide more housing for this population should be applauded and not criticized. What I was trying to say was that in our excitement to create more housing options, we need to be careful to make sure we learn from the lessons of the past. We need to make sure that all housing opportunities provide adequate support, encourage integration in the greater community, assist with jobs and recreational activities, and promote self-determination. People need to be able to make their own choices about where they live, how much help they need, and how they spend their time. Thank you for allowing me to try to set the record straight.
Okay. Thank you so much. All right. Okay, so we're going to review the minutes from the last meeting, and you can just, talk among yourselves. And then we'll have to accept the minutes. Thank you. Oh, sure. Yes. I'm sorry. Okay.
I don't want to interrupt what you're reading now, though. So.
Okay. Yeah, let's, if you would give us a few minutes to do this, you can just sit there and review your notes, and then we'll fix this up.
Oh yeah. I spent hours listening to the testimony to understand what was said.
Wow.
Lots of typos, I'm sure.
Probably done the most detailed minutes I've ever seen any person ever do.
I know.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. No, me. For the,
Specifically,
Manchester Transit, maybe.
I think he just said,
Manchester Authority.
that's what, how he stated it. But, I assume I can put that.
Yes,
I just thought that it was Manchester Transit Authority.
right, and they have, you know, a ride at will, kind of. Okay, all right.
So you can.
Could we have a motion to accept the minutes?
You're right. I motion to accept the amendments as we explain the amendments
Okay.
to
Yes,
the
second
chair-
for that?
to the clerk.
Second my own.
All right, I will second it. And then,
All in
we'll,
favor?
yep, I'd say
Aye.
aye,
Aye.
and we'll accept the minutes. Okay, now we
right.
have a couple more people who would like to speak. If you could state your name and spell it if it's hard.
Hopefully not. My name is Marissa Berg, Berg, and I am Executive Director at Community Support Network. We are the trade association for the 10 area agencies in the state of New Hampshire. I just wanted to, my testimony is short. I recognize we're coming in at the end. I just want to thank you all for your time in really working to try and understand this really sort of vast issue that really touches a lot of people. I'm excited that there's a continuation over the next year. So thank you for that. You've heard a lot of testimony surrounding housing considerations and particularly surrounding issues relating to people with developmental disabilities. And I just wanted to sort of close out as you're going into preparing the interim report with a few asks for the next session. And as you are reviewing housing related bills over these next few months, please keep in mind what you've learned from all the testimony that's been provided. If a developer is providing information around housing, are the homes accessible to all through universal design? Do they foster the participation of all residents in the community? Can people with disabilities afford to live there? You've heard stakeholders that are sharing how complex the regulations are that surround certification and licensing. Certification and issues and confusion about requirements are often really challenging to navigate and are adding barriers to development on top of what exists around funding and other issues around resources. Please consider that licensing and certification changes that could potentially surmount some of these logistical challenges while also still keeping guardrails in place to protect the community for the long term. Please also consider the importance of ADUs, and especially ADUs that have enough square footage for an individual to also live with a live-in caregiver. ADUs allow adults with disabilities to have their own space to live while still being able to access support when needed. They can also help fill a gap in housing availability for people with disabilities. The proposed budget from BDS, as we know it for right now, contains an increase in funding to fund room and board. These funds are needed to help cover the costs of housing for individuals with developmental disabilities who are unable to maintain sufficient employment to cover costs. Medicaid funds cannot be used for this purpose, which leaves a gap for individuals with significant support needs related to their disability. We ask that you support this request for the coming session. It is critically important that the committee recognize that there's no one-size-fits-all solution for housing for individuals with disabilities. Everyone has unique needs and circumstances that impact what housing arrangement is appropriate for them. Individuals must retain the ability to live in the home setting that works best for their needs. Staffed residential homes, enhanced family care homes, supported independent living, independent housing within the community, and others. And we have to make sure to always remember that we are not returning to a world where individuals with developmental disabilities lived in institutions. Also, any choice in housing and any discussion, we need to have it shared in plain language for people with disabilities to be able to access. So I just wanted to leave those sort of closing remarks from CS&I's perspective. And again, we look forward to continuing to hear more about what others in the community are sharing.
All right, thank you. Does anyone have any questions? For Representative Lamontagne.
I just want to clarify a little bit about the budget funding from BDS for the 10 community area agencies. I'm sorry. So of the area agencies, what are the types of housing options do you provide again? I'm familiar only with the homes support program. No, what is it called? No, I can't even
The
remember the name.
PDMS?
A home providership.
Okay.
But could you just elaborate on the different options that the agencies provide?
So are you asking about the list of the different options that I just listed, or what area agencies provide?
What area agencies provide?
Okay.
The agencies.
Yeah, so area agencies are the designation of area agency is a specific sort of type of service. Within area agencies, though, they can choose to provide certain other provider services, so direct services. There are some, not all, area agencies that choose to provide residential services, CPS services, which are sort of historically referred to as day services. For residential services, an area agency can choose to offer enhanced family care, which has been kind of the adult foster care model, where an individual would live with a contracted home provider. So that's enhanced family care. There are some area agencies who operate a staffed residence. So it could be a 24/7 staffed model, sort of similar to what you heard Sue talking a little bit about today. There's also varying levels of community support for individuals who live in the community. So there are some people who really just need some help getting groceries or getting out into the community, getting to work. And that's really dependent on the individual's needs. There's also other support models where an individual might live with a family caregiver. It really sort of runs the gamut. There are many, many different housing options for individuals, and some area agencies choose to do some. It really is it's a decision on behalf of that agency.
Thank you for elaborating.
Anything else? Thank you for coming.
Thank
and
you
I'm
very
sure We'll
much.
see you again.
Thanks.
Okay, is there anybody else with anything, like to add anything else before we, yes. Come forward, state your name.
Thank you very much. I will be quick. I know everyone wants to end this so that they can carry on with their day. My name is Vanessa Blaze, and I serve as the Director of Policy and Planning for the New Hampshire Council on Developmental Disabilities. And I was asked by 3 people who have the experience of disability to read into the record their testimony because they could not be able to attend today. The first testimony that I'm going to read is by someone by the name of Emery Quinn of Manchester, New Hampshire. My name is Emery Quinn, and I am one of your disabled constituents. I am currently living in Barnstead at a family home due to the inaccessibility of my current apartment in Manchester, which I am trying to break the lease of. I am living on the 2nd floor of my apartment building. The elevator in the building was broken down for over a week, which is the 2nd time there has been problems with it. The inspection for which has been expired for over 6 months at this point. With the elevator down, the water has been shut off multiple times during construction, with a note posted to the doors instructing residents to use facilities that are a quarter mile away from the building, following a road with crumbling sidewalks and no curb cuts. While expressing my concern not just for myself, but for the other wheelchair users in this building, and those dependent on the elevator, I was told to mind my own business. Since we have moved in there, have been 2 long bouts of construction. During that time, the accessible ramp has been blocked off, and the accessible parking places have been filled with equipment. Thankfully, the construction crews have been helpful in dealing with it. The management have not been helpful, even with multiple reminders. We have been consistently met with indifference and hostility. We signed the lease knowing we had 1 small closet to place my wheelchair and other mobility aids in. At this time, it is currently being replaced with a washer and dryer, leaving us with the task of finding storage elsewhere. Most months, we can hardly afford food and rent, let alone the idea of renting a storage facility. This has added to the complete inaccessibility of my current apartment, as I am left with very little mobility and means of getting around. During the current construction, the floor has been torn up in the hallways, leaving it uneven and very risky to wheel my chair over. Entrances are blocked, and the accessible parking spaces are again filled with pallets. I am afraid of rolling into the building because of the possible damage to my wheelchair, which I would be left paying $5,000 out of pocket for. During all of this, I keep reflecting on the privilege I have that many that find themselves in my situation do not. A place to stay, knowledge of resources, time to reach out and learn about what can be done to help, and connections to community organizations. Many people don't have families to stay with or other options to fall back on. I am incredibly grateful for the resources and support that I do have, but even still, I find myself in what feels like an impossible situation. I can only imagine what it would be like without the help I do have, how others in my situation feel when they have no support or help at all. I have spent over the last month reaching out to several legal departments and organizations that are there for times like this, specifically for low-income and disabled individuals. But because of the housing crisis, everyone is at max capacity and unable to provide aid. I reached out to the Governor's Commission on Disability and learned that they would not be able to pursue my case without attaching my name to it. Not being able to access even basic help without the protection of anonymity, is a huge deterrent as there is so much risk involved. Retaliation is illegal, but we also know that it happens. Myself and many others in this position barely have enough money to afford rent, let alone what it may cost to defend ourselves against possible retaliation from landlords or the ability to take our landlords to court. There's even more risk involved if you are an immigrant, if you are a person of color, if you are queer or disabled. Intersecting identities increase the risk and fear of retaliation exponentially. It is a risk that a lot of people cannot afford to take. I want to thank you for your time and dedication to looking into such an important issue that many Granite Staters find themselves faced with. As a disabled person, we're often invisible and not given the space to speak out about issues that affect us directly. It's refreshing to see that these spaces are being created and that there are people out there willing to listen and try to take action to better the situation. The next one is from Caitlin Fulton, a citizen of Dover, New Hampshire. My name is Caitlin Fulton, and I am a citizen of Dover, New Hampshire. I am also disabled. My disabilities affect what kind of housing I can access, literally stairs, especially those featured in the many beautiful old homes the Seacoast boasts, are complete non-starters for me. I finally found a brand new, mostly ADA accessible apartment here in Dover, but it costs me over half of my take-home pay. I am blessed that my parents were willing to co-sign my lease, but I work full-time for a state agency. I'm 36 years old. I should not need to have my parents co-sign the first accessible housing opportunity I have found in my adult life. How many of my disabled brothers and sisters do not have the support or means to afford an apartment made with access in mind that allow them to live fully independently in the community? I believe a few paths are in front of us in New Hampshire to create more accessible housing. Fund rehabilitation projects to retrofit existing apartment buildings up to ADA code. Enforce accessibility requirements in new housing construction. Expand funding for Section 8 housing vouchers. lessen the wait times, incentivize more landlords to accept those vouchers. I appreciate your time and attention to this matter. And lastly, this one is from Kelly Earhart of Nashua, New Hampshire. My name is Kelly Earhart and I live in Nashua. I am asking you to consider the following information in your review of how the housing crisis in New Hampshire impacts people with disabilities. I feel the disabled should not live in an institutional setting. We should be able to interact with other people with and without disabilities. I live in an apartment building. I have a Section 8 housing choice voucher. I work as an independent consultant, and I cannot afford the $1,900 a month rent for a one-bedroom. I go to yoga and Qigong and the library in my community. The public needs to see that people with disabilities are like anywhere else and learn to accept us. Thank you very much, and I will provide the written testimony.
Thank you. Okay. Anything else to add from anybody? Okay. Right. Thank you. If there's nothing further, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
I didn't
Oh,
make
you
it.
wanted to ask
Fake out.
questions?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm good. So at the end of last time,
Yeah.
there was a question of like how the interim report is going to be written and what's going to be on it and how are we going to
Right.
write it and what's going to be on it and stuff like that. So did you said that you were going to get some information about that.
Right.
Did you get some, and can you share it with me?
Okay. Here, our researcher gave us a template for what our report could look like. She also emailed us some reports that have been done by other folks. So there's okay. Okay, so this one here. All right. So this one. Okay. And there's only one this one on the.
Oh, the findings and recommendations. Like,
Yeah.
so fill in the blanks right here.
Okay. Okay. All right. So, and this has been emailed to us. So if we want to, look at it, and then figure out about maybe doing a work session and talking about what we think should be included in the report, what kind of recommendations.
Did you say a work session?
Yeah. I don't know.
Okay, so you're considering another meeting before November 1st?
Yeah, I honestly, I've been told that
What's today's date?
there aren't report police who are going to come and arrest us if we don't get it in by November 1st.
I mean, I voted for the law. I should probably follow it.
I also think it may be possible that we could come up with one simple piece of legislation that we could file by the deadline in November.
Well,
And
I was not reelected, so this will be my last meeting as part of the committee. So I won't be filing anything, right? But so I just wanted to give kind of my thoughts or whatever as and find out what's going to be in the report or have some contribution, I guess, to the findings, recommendations. I believe that it's that we can, I guess less is more, but it also seems like more is more. So last time you were talking about you wanted to have like a lot of stuff in your report, and this report is obviously kind of it's really trying to condense it down to like,
Right.
one page or maybe a page of our notes, like maybe 6 pages or something like that. Not the
Yeah, so.
all of the information.
Yeah, so we received a lot of information, testimony, et
Yeah.
cetera. So, I think we can write a report and then, have, an appendix or addenda that has all of the materials that we, when I was thinking about it, I thought, the report should include a list of everyone that we received testimony from.
Okay.
And then some, important things that we've discovered, like the lack of affordability, the lack of accessibility,
I mean,
and then
yeah.
and some opportunities, and barriers to creating new forms of housing for people with disabilities, and then as far as recommendations, looking into those things and.
I think yes, it's possible that we could have some. There's a section here for process and procedures, right? And it's part of our charge to talk with certain people, so we can kind of address that we've met some of those requirements in the law, by listing out those people that came. Finding and recommendations, I think that it's kind of twofold. If there is anything that we know that there is, legislation that we think that is appropriate, that could be one section. And then also kind of just thinking about going where we go in the next year, right? And how we want to dig in deeper. I think, for example, my thoughts on the definition of facility and how it was brought up last time that by someone. I think that the facility maybe is kind of based on the number of rooms or the beds or the number of people staying in there, and in one structure versus in kind of like a separate apartment or something like that. So, this, like the example that was given here today, right, where they rented something from someone. If let's say they rented a 3-bedroom apartment, and so they had 3 people in that building, right? And then they worked well with that landlord. They rented a different 3-bedroom apartment, happens to be in the same building. That, I think, would make them qualify for needing licensure. I don't know, but I think that because it's under the same roof, even though it's 2 separate contracts or whatever, it may be something that this committee may want to dig in more about. How are they specifically defining the facility and the scope of the facility, kind of a thing. And so that's one of the things that I think it's a little archaic or kind of in the weeds, but it's something that I think is having significant ramifications. And if the company that was here earlier had a business or had someone that they were able to work with that could achieve that, why should we be putting additional barriers or whatever in the way? I think that that's something that could have an impact on if they opened up another facility in that place. So it's just something that I think is like an example of where I think this committee could go deeper into the weeds.
Yeah, I agree, but I think we should probably have a work session or a Zoom meeting where we try to come up with our what we want in the preliminary report, and then, you know, plan to go deeper into some issues. Maybe take action on anything something simple we could tackle this year, and then plan it out.
Do we have to vote to accept it, or is it kind of just like you submit it to the clerk or something like that and that's it?
What does our researcher say? Okay.
Okay, so it sounds like a work session then. If we're taking a vote, then we have to be here and it has to be a meeting, right?
Okay.
I mean, if we're voting, then
Yeah.
there's no vote
We
without a meeting.
accepting it, yeah. Yeah.
Oh, yes, yes. I mean, we are meeting right now. I'm talking. Yeah, but if we weren't going to write the, yeah, yes.
So looking, yeah, so as,
So either we decide it now, or if we want to work on it, you know, for a little while, then we would have to have a meeting.
well, I'm fine with that. How, are you okay with that?
With which one?
With-
One.
With coming back.
I'm fine with coming back. Before the first,
29th?
next Tuesday.
Yeah.
Yeah. We could just have it as a work session, and
Yeah.
and then at the end of the meeting, we'll just plan to, like have our ideas hopefully
Mhm.
ahead of time, and then kind of discuss them, and then we can like do a mock-up of like what, like the bullet points or something like that. We don't have to have it like all typed out or whatever, like she said. It was, as long as the gist is there, and then
Okay.
Yeah.
we
All right,
can
so, yeah,
fill
so
it
I
out.
can, you know, I'll just put, you know, together a draft. I do want to include in, you know, who we heard from.
Absolutely.
Because that was
Sounds good.
in the original legislation, there was a list that
That- yeah.
Representative Reed provided for us of who we were supposed to talk to. And we did hear from most of them. But yeah, so let's plan on coming back here next Tuesday, and I'll just put up kind of a, you know, sort of a draft for us to work off.
Okay.
And based on the template that we've been provided, and looking at some of these other reports, like, you know, like some of them are more substantial than others. She only had one copy of this, but she
Nope,
has emailed it
worries.
to us. So I think what we're looking at is something more like this that will have attachments to it and so forth.
Okay.
Okay, all right.
That sounds good. So are you thinking 1:30 again?
Yeah, 1:30
Okay.
sounds good. Can you make sure that yeah,
1:30, 29th here. Yeah.
no.
Yeah, I wasn't saying that we had to notice that we're gonna make a decision. No, that's not what I was trying to say. But I wouldn't. Just let everyone know that we're not necessarily going to be soliciting comment and stuff like that. So they don't have to show up if they don't really, unless they just want to hear us talk.
Yeah,
To each other.
Yeah.
But feel free to. I think that's
Yeah.
all that I had. So I can make a motion to adjourn.
Do I have a second?
Can't.
Second. Okay. Without objection, the meeting is adjourned.
All right.
So
Good.